Hello and welcome to the Android Mash tutorials. And so this is kind of like a whack-a-mole type of game with an Android bent. So in this tutorial you'll learn a little bit about how to do some basic animation. Okay, learn about that timer, and also we'll talk a little bit about randomness. And we did random in Python, right? We did the random integer with that number picker, or guess the number game. And this is going to be similar in the sense that we want the Android symbol to appear at different locations on our canvas. So anyways, we have a new project here. I think I called it MoleMash, but Android Mash, whatever. It's a mole whacker game. So we're going to upload 3 files. And so those 3 files should be available to you, and I'll let you know where they are. There's my app inventor. And the 3 ones are going to be this Android teacher one. And this one basically is the little sprite, or the image we're going to use for the sprite. The other one we want is this droid sound. So that's going to be a sound effect that will play when you squash the little guy. And what we want as well is a background. Okay, and so that background there is this guy. Okay. So basically we've got 2 images and a MP3 or sound file. All right. Now, similar to what we did before with our paint pot, we're going to bring in a canvas. And so of course the canvas is where we can do the animations, we can sort of draw and so on. So it's kind of an important aspect to it. So we're going to drag that in again. The background is fine. We might as well change the background image now. That one's going to be the block one here. Just go OK. And in terms of its height and width, the width, we're going to get it to fill the parent. It's going to fill up the whole thing. Okay. And then the height here, we want it, again, we want a bit of room at the bottom. So we're going to set it to 400 pixels. Okay. And so just this little bit of room at the bottom we're going to have here. These are supposed to represent the holes where he'll pop up, but whatever. Okay. So that's basically our background. Now the next thing we want to do is create an image sprite. Okay. And you can see it right here. There's a ball and there's an image sprite. And we're just going to grab the image sprite. Ooh, exciting. Yes. Well, of course, it's not very exciting at the moment, but we can set the image. So just like before, there's a picture here. It's set to none, and we want to find the Android teacher one. And so now, hopefully, now I think, oh, there he is. Okay, it just took a little bit of time. There he is. We don't have to set the size or anything there. Okay, it should just be like that. So there's our little Android guy. Now, 2 more things that we're going to add before we actually start doing the programming part here is 2 elements that we need to bring into the designer but don't actually show up here, and they are the sound, obviously. And the sound has an interesting sort of additional thing. In addition to the sound, whoops. You got to drag it into here. In addition to the sound, it can use the vibrator. Okay, activate the vibration on your phone. And then the other thing that we want is the clock. And so the clock is not in here. I've forgotten where the clock is. Just a second. Is it in there? No. We will find it. Shouldn't be in the user interface. I don't think it'd be sensors. Oh, there it is. It is under sensors, the clock. Okay, and again, just drag it in there. It's a sort of non-visible element. Okay, it's just down here. Now, we've got the time interval. We can change it here, or we can change it in the code. If we want to make the game more difficult, we can go ahead and change that. But it would be good as maybe in the code that we get it to change. And at the moment, it's 1,000. That stands for 1,000 milliseconds, which means 1 second. Okay, and you notice here that the button says it's timer enabled at the moment, and timer always fires. Those are checked. Those are the defaults. We'll leave them there. You can access these not only here, but in the code as well. The sound, we might as well put the source in there, and that would be the droid sound. Okay. Now, one last thing maybe is the image sprite. I might just change the name there. Let's rename, and we'll just call it Android Sprite. I don't think it's too big of a deal, but it's always good to get the habit of naming things properly. All right. So with the coding, obviously we need to go into the blocks, and the idea is that it will be moving left and right and up and down into random spots so that you have to try to click on the screen and beat it. Now, the blocks here, there is our canvas, and that's not what we want this time. We don't want to use our canvas there. We want to actually come to our clock first, because the whole idea is that with the clock, at each second, because that's what we set the timer at, we want it to change position. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do when the clock 1 timer, we only have one clock, so that's what it's defaulting to, do something. Well, at each second, what do we want it to do? We want it to move the sprite. So there's our Android sprite. And so do we have something where it would move? Call, set. Now, where is it? There's something about the position. Okay, there we are. Call Android sprite move to. So we can put that in there. And that will let us move to, and then we have an X and Y. So we need to put an X and Y location here. Now, one of the things you might think of is, well, we'll put a number in there. But what would be the issue if you put a number in there? You're right. It would just stay in that one position. Okay? Hopefully that was your answer. Now, so what we're going to do is get a sense of randomness here. And so we can choose a random integer. So I believe in the math section, there is a random integer. So again, just like we did in Python, there's a random.randint. Okay, here, this is the same thing. Now, bring that in, and we might as well copy it and paste it. So Control-C, Control-V, and we'll plop it in there. Now, this here, we've got sort of a hard-coded number, 100 to 100. Now, I remember the y-axis was like 400. And you could do that, and you could go in and kind of play around and say, you know, maybe this is 350. Okay, I'm just sort of guessing at the moment. So say it was 350 across and 400 on the height. Okay, right? That's okay to do, but there's one big issue with that, and especially if you're dealing with, say, a phone, which you could have maybe a 4-inch screen, a 4.5, a 5-inch. Maybe it goes up to a tablet that's 8 inches or 10 inches. What's going to happen is the game, is it not going to respond correctly? Because the app might fill up the whole thing. But if you've hard-coded these numbers, then you might be limiting the play field basically of your little guy in terms of where he can move. So there's actually something better than this. So we're going to actually get rid of these two little numbers. Okay, and you can trash them. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. And what we can actually do is grab the canvas's properties. And so we can actually go in here and somewhere down here, canvas, there's height. So I'm going to pull that in. So the height would be on the y-axis. So here it'll go from 1 to whatever the canvas height is. So now if the height's different, the program doesn't, it will adjust to it without you having to do anything. And this is one of the really important things about programming, is that if you can make it as sort of general as possible and avoid as much hard coding, then you can really improve your code. Sorry, I'm just trying to look here and find the width. There we are. So again, this little guy would go in there. Now, if you want to, you could try running this. And if everything goes to plan, which it should be moving around and, looking, taking up every sort of spot on the screen. Now, the next thing we'll do is get that vibration going. And so it's going to be really quite easy. we want it to vibrate when we've touched the sprite. So basically we go to the sprite, and then there's something on here when the sprite is touched. Okay, now it will tell you exactly where it is, X and Y coordinates. We don't need that. All we want it to do is play the sound with quotes. Okay, and so there is a play of the sound there. We'll get to that later on. We're just going to get it to vibrate. And so you can see that it will call sound 1 vibrate. Okay, and it's got a certain amount of time. So we do have to put a time in there, and it helps you out. It tells you it's in milliseconds. And then so we'll set that to 500. So basically it will vibrate for half a second. If that's too long, just reduce it. Okay. Now the next thing we're going to do is looking at how we don't always want the mole, the Android guy, to show up at the same place at the start all the time. To do that, we'll use what's called a sort of initialize function that will only run right at the start. And if you remember, some of you have done Unity. If you remember from Unity there was a start function, okay, or an awake function. So what I'm going to do is go canvas, and I think it's on here. When canvas, screen. When screen is initialized, there we are, sorry, screen 1 is initialized. What we're going to do, I'm actually going to take this block and copy it and plug it in there. So what happens is that when the screen initializes, so when it starts, it will actually randomly locate it sort of before the game starts, and then the clock timer sort of takes over. Okay, so this would only run once. Now, one thing to notice here is we've got what's called duplication of code. We've got this code and this code in the same spot. Generally, anytime you have duplicated code, it's better to try to eliminate that duplication. And there's multiple reasons for it. I mean, one thing, it makes it a little bit simpler, but the big reason is if you made a change, say, to this one, then you'd have to make sure, oh yeah, I got to go down and make a change to this one as well. That's hard to do. If you've got the same code over and over again and you make a change once, then you got to find, the 10 different spots where that code is. You could miss one. So to reduce that redundancy, that copying of it, we're going to create a procedure. So what we'll do is to procedure we'll do. Okay, so just pull this one out here. And basically what I'm going to do is just grab all this and throw it in here. And I'm going to call this, I'm going to give it a different name. Instead of procedure, I'm going to call it random move, because that's really, what it's doing. Okay, so this little procedure will do this. And so now in here, instead of having this big block, I'm just going to take the procedure, and you can see there's my random move, and I can chuck it in there. Same thing with this one, okay, because that was just duplicated code. I'm just going to go back in, call random move, and plug it in there. So again, this is sort of think about simplification, removing duplicates. It also gets you to think in what's called sort of the top-down programming method, where you sort of look at things and say, okay, breaking them into smaller and smaller components, and then sort of basically breaking it down and seeing where you can reuse code over and over again, and try to simplify things. Okay, so we've got a kind of functioning game. I mean, the mole should move, so you can go ahead and play it. It should move in random spots, and when you touch it, it should give you a little vibration there. Okay, so check it out, see if it's working. When we come back, we'll add a few more features to make it even a better game.